What's going on? It's good to see y'all here. And yeah, see Bex, I tagged you this time. I learned my lesson. So today we are going to be continuing hopefully finishing Elbereth here. And I say hopefully because I still got a lot of work to do, but I'm excited. Hope y'all are too. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So I also changed my layout here so you can actually see what I'm doing instead of just looking at the miniature. So if we're looking at what we've done so far, I did do some work on Elbereth off stream. I did not like the way her eyes turned out on stream. I felt like they were really janky and they didn't really have a good amount of definition or separation from the skin tone, things like that. So I went in and fixed that, corrected that. Also, if you can see on her cheeks, I added a little bit more of a contrast, a little bit darker of a color, just so that we can, that music sounds like it's a little bit loud. What do y'all think? Let's turn that down. Yeah, I have no idea how that got switched around, but you know, it happens. There we go. Cool. Anyway, so I added a little bit more of a darker skin tone just to give it a little bit more contrast and definition so that her cheekbones really stand out and look nice. I did add a little bit more contrast in the hair just to make sure, you know, we're getting some good definition there as well. I also made a change on the mace. So if you remember last time, her mace, I put some white in the recesses and then yellow on the outside. But me and Bex were talking, and she had mentioned that she kind of wanted to look like an iron mace with kind of a gem inside that's glowing from the inside. So it's still metal. The metal itself isn't glowing, just the inside is glowing. So what I'm going to... Okay, well, awesome. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't like so incredibly loud that it was distracting. So anyway, so I went ahead and painted the outer edges of the mace a dark gray, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt, and I say attempt because I've tried it a few times and I'm getting better at it, but it's a technique called non-metallic metal. So it's basically a way of using gradients between darks and light colors to make something look metallic, but actually be made from just regular old, you know, paint instead of actually using a metallic paint. And then beyond that, we're going to do some recess shading. So adding a little bit more definition. Hold on one second. Yeah, that's a little bit better. A little bit more definition in between some of her edges here, like the trim of her armor, stuff like that, just to make sure that we get a nice transition and a nice hard stop where we want that hard stop. And then finally, we're going to be starting on the base. Now, the base is really interesting. In the source image that I have of Elbereth, this is basically like a rock sitting on top of lava with a bunch of bones around it. So I wanted to try something interesting with this. I'm going to be painting the rock almost like Ignis, right? So it's going to be mostly dark with a few lighter spots. But the lava in underneath the rock, closer to where the lava is, I'm actually going to be trying out a new thing. Yeah, exactly. It's Josiah's bones. But anyway, but on top of this lava, I'm going to be adding, and I can't do it on stream because it takes a few different things to get it right, but I'm just letting you know what I'm going to be doing with it. A crack paint. And what a cracking paint or crackling paint does is when you apply it, as it dries, it actually starts to shrink and creates cracks and crevices in the paint. What's really cool about that is you can use it on lava to make it look like the top layer of the lava is solidifying, but the stuff underneath that thin crust is still molten. And so I think that's going to look really cool down on the bottom as well as underneath the rock, kind of fading in. So like we have this little area here that's jutting out. So doing it underneath that, I think would look really cool too. So she's standing on a surface that has this like molten lava crust underneath, and I think it's gonna look really cool. And then of course we're gonna do on the bones on this, we're going to try for a fade from a light to a dark, because whatever is closer to the lava is going to be illuminated, whatever's further away is darkened. And then we'll do a little bit of controlled dry brushing to see if we can't get a little bit of a glow effect on the underside of those bones. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with our paint. So first things first, I used that same black gray that I did on Monday to paint the outsides of the mace. So that's gonna be our starting color here. And we're gonna wanna gradually get it lighter and lighter and lighter. But we don't wanna go full white, so I'm actually gonna use a color that's called Pallid Witch Flesh. So it's kind of this yellow, white, almost pinky color. And we're gonna slowly mix the two. And as we mix them, we're gonna be building up our layers between the two on that mace. And the way that light would normally work is all of the edges would be the brightest, right? And like underneath the mace would be dark, and the edges that curve back up on the mace would be bright. But since this is glowing from inside, what we're gonna do is the areas that are closest to the glow, so closest to the center, are actually gonna be darker, and the parts that come out are going to be a little bit lighter. So it's going to give this idea that it's, you know, casting light. So the reason why we're doing it that way, because normally what would be close to your light source would be the lightest, and what's further away would be darkest. But the way I'm looking at it is the parts of this mace that are further away are also curved. So as it curves out, that light is going to hit that and reflect out, versus the pieces that are flat against the light source would actually be more shadowed. So that's the way I'm looking at it. So let's go ahead and get our brush here. Grab a little bit of water. You never want to use a dry brush right off the bat, unless of course you're dry brushing. I'm surprised my automatic moderator didn't mute that, Steven. All right, so we're just going to start pulling in some of that witch flesh here, just to give ourselves a nice little dark gray. And when we start this, it's going to look a little bit janky because our colors are going to be really, really contrasty. And you're not going to have this really nice gradient that we would want in the end. The reason we're doing this is we're actually going to create that gradient later with a glaze. At least that's the plan. Oh, I'm sorry. Stormtrooper XL. I'm sorry, did I accidentally dox you on stream? If I am a jerk, it is because I was raised with you. By the way, this is my brother. Honestly, with the amount of diversity that we have in our group with the Trials of Imagination, I wouldn't doubt if somebody there had that skill. Just like one first name drop, and all of a sudden they know. Next weekend, I would have to see what I'm doing next weekend. I'm probably... So no, I don't know who Stormbreak is. But yeah, Stormtrooper XL is my older brother. Oh, that's Somehow, Bex, I'm not surprised, but at the same time, I'm surprised. I don't know what these emotions are that I have right now. Gotcha, okay. I'm excited about the next one shot because I'm actually DMing in this one shot versus playing. Oh yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to D&D, I both love playing, but DMing for me is just awesome because I get to, like, one of my favorite part about D&D is role playing. And it can get kind of dry if you're role playing the same character for a long period. At least for me it does. So a DM though, you get to be all the characters. So for me, DMing is just a bunch of fun. Nice. Well, I'm glad they can play. Because if correct me if I'm wrong, Bex, but isn't that how Trials of Imagination started? Was at the with the Reform Gamers one shot? Gotcha. All right, so now finish my first layer of highlight. So I'm going to pull in some more of this lighter color, and we're going in for the second. And we're just going to keep building this highlight. We're going to come closer and closer to that top edge till the top edge is going to be almost completely white. Yeah, I think if I remember, it was like a lot more people joined than they thought, and so it ended up being like, oh, absolutely, dude. Well, you can join. So there's, I'll send you a link later. There's a Reformed Gamers group that once a year will do one shots, and that's what I did with. Yeah, that's what I had heard. But they do one shots once a year, and I actually did last year's one shot as a player, and I was able to kind of, was it last year's or was it like 6 months ago? Yeah, okay, last quarter's then, I guess. And I was able to play test some of the new Fizbin's material. So it's definitely, if you're wanting to just play test some stuff, you know, I would say reach out to someone or reach out to the Discord and see if you can be a player. I don't know if the deadline for players is up yet. Bex can tell me. Can tell you. Monday, so I'll get you that link as soon as possible. And like I mentioned, we're just working that highlight all the way to the edge, but coming a little bit further in than we did with the last highlight. Just that we start getting a little bit of a gradient. It's going to be a rough gradient. But just working that closer and closer in. All right, let's bring in some more of that witch flesh. And with the witch flesh now, I'm really bringing more of it in than I am with the gray, because I really want to start getting that highlight up. more bright because we need to start getting that more white than gray about this stage. Paint, 2-bit. It was a lot of fun. I think, I had a lot of fun. I think 2-bit did too. He can tell you better than I can. I thought it was a blast. It was just chaotic enough to be interesting. I think we caught our DM by surprise a little bit, which is always great. Oh yes, absolutely, 2-bit. The Reformed gamers, they're always saying nothing funky ever happens, and it's totally fun. Nobody ever does joke characters, and they're tons of fun. Oh, oh yeah, true. I forgot y'all were still on the way home from Fayetteville. So for those of you who don't know, right before I got on the Fallout stream on Sunday, me, my brother, my dad, and some of our friends from a group we're a part of went and played a paintball tournament, which was tons of fun. Oh yeah, the structure's a lot more organized. Still super chaotic though. I know. So the teams red and blue, like when I say we stomped them, our side stomped them, I don't mean like we just beat them. Like this was like Georgia versus Florida kind of stomping. Just crushed it. I'm saying Georgia specifically because my brother is a Florida fan, like a noob. Where's White? There's White. I will try to, and I hope, 2-bit, that you enjoy your time in the studio. All right, now for this non-metallic metal look, we are going to start adding in our white right on the edges here, just to give it that little bit of reflective look and to tie it in with the glow that's going on in the center. It's always awkward trying to hold this sometimes and keep it on in frame. Tell me you're new to streaming painting without telling me you're new to streaming painting. All right, now this part's gonna be fun. very, very gentle. Also, Liam, if you're still here, I'm not sure if you are or not. Mark is done printing. I just have to remove all of the support material, get him primed, and that will be next week's stream project. So we'll get to see Mark next time, which I think is going to be awesome. Then after that, I have no idea because I'm terrible at planning and will probably do it last minute. All right. So I think I'm good with this for the most part. I might add a little bit more white to the back reflection on these bottom pieces here. Because I do think I want that to be a little bit more contrasty. Yeah, the only difference is these are all made from resin, and there's no way that I'll be printing that kind of part with resin. I'd want to print that out of filament. As far as what, Bex? I mean, pretty much once I get the file, pretty much the only thing that I have to do, because the file is designed for 3D printing, is add in the supports and add in the, yeah, I like that. Add in the, pretty much just the supports, position it correctly. Like some of the positioning can be a little bit difficult. Like, for instance, I learned really quick that you want to have the miniature at an angle. Like, all right, so if this is on the build plate, you don't want it to be flat on the build plate. You want it to be at a slight angle. Well, you don't want to angle to the side because now one wing is going to have a hard time being supported than the other. You don't want it angled forward because now you have supports on the face and there's more cleanup. And then you don't, so you most of the time want it sitting at a 35-degree angle. So placement's important. But as far as like editing the actual file, other than adding supports, there's really nothing more I need to do. Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, the reason why you want to add an angle to it isn't because necessarily that an angle is super, uber duper important. But having that angle will actually allow the flat parts to print flat. Otherwise, because one of the problems with SLA printing or printing with resin, which that's what SLA printing is the resin will actually warp. And so you want to control that warp with things like angle. So, and it'll also shrink too. So if you have the miniature sitting at an angle, then all the flat bits that would normally warp are printed in such a way that it doesn't actually warp. So the parts that are flat actually print true flat, instead of if you print it like at a parallel to the build plate, you would more than likely get warping. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding a white glaze to the whole, to what we just painted, and what that's doing is it's just going to start blending in that gradient, bringing out the highlights. And again, glaze is nothing more than just 50% paint, 50% water. And basically all we're doing with the glaze is we are basically getting all of that I just blanked on what this stuff is called. Pigment. We're just reducing the amount of pigment that's actually in what we're applying to the miniature. Because less pigment means it's going to be a little bit more translucent. And with a glaze, what we're trying to do is just add a really thin layer of paint to help blend in some of those bits and pieces. So I'm happy with this, the way that this is turning out. Now, one thing that I'll probably do is I'll probably add a yellow glaze, because as we know, metal doesn't just go from black to white, right? It goes from, it will reflect the color of the light, especially silver metal like steel or iron, especially if it's polished like a mace would be, because, you know, that's how smithing works, I guess. So I'll probably add a yellow glaze over this whole thing, just to give it a slight yellow tint, as if it was reflecting the light that's coming from inside of it. Because while in reality, if we had like a glowing gem, like for instance, if Elbereth cast light on her mace, more than likely it would just be white light. But if I were to just paint this white and then a white to black gradient, it looks kind of flat and boring. So what you want to do instead is create a colored gradient that gives this idea of light without a light source, right? It's the whole point of object source lighting in non-metallic metal. So now I'm just bringing in a little bit of a dark glaze just to come back into the center a little bit, mostly because I think I added a little bit too much of that light glaze. Just like that. I'm just bringing back a little bit of that darkness in the center of the mace, just like we talked about earlier. Yeah, exactly. And so with the blade itself, that's the same kind of ghost white color that I use on the wings. So it's almost like a blue gray. But yeah, so for the look, if I could actually grow the hair for the Bob Ross fro, I probably would, to be honest. But there's nothing up here anymore, so that's not going to happen. Plus, I am definitely not as calm as he is. I am a little bit more chaotic than he was. Put the wig over the headphones. What if the headphones were the wig? This is thinking. We've got to think about this for a second. What if the wig was the headphones? Like, you know how they have the headphones like the cat ears? You do that with a Bob Ross wig. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of this yellow here, and we're going to mix it in with this white glaze that I had going on here, just to soften the yellow up a little bit. Pull in a little bit more white, because I want to bring down the saturation on this yellow just a little bit, because I really don't want it to be, I don't want the glaze to be yellow. I just want to give it a yellow tint. It's probably a bit much, honestly, but I can correct that just by using a damp brush to pull off some of that glaze. So that's one of the good things about glazing, is because it's mostly water, it's very easy to wick up into a damp brush. That's a little bit better. It's just giving a hint of yellow there. I'm not sure how well you can see the difference on stream, but to my eyes in here, it looks really, really nice. Matt, I think Matt has already left because he said he had some studio time that he was going to. Oh, Crumley, gotcha. I know those cat ears were $1 million ideas, so maybe the Bob Ross headphones is the way to go. All Matts are the same person. That is true. So what about people like me whose last name is Matthews? What about that? My last name has Matt in it, so does that mean I'm also one with the Matt? There we go. So, I don't know how well y'all can see that, but I really like how that turned out. It's got a nice gradient from dark to light with a slight yellow tint to it. It's exactly what I wanted to see. All is matte. All right, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to recess shade. For that, I'm going to get rid of my wet palette for a moment and bring in a wash. So like we talked about with the two smaller miniatures that I did the other night, a wash is just a paint with a flow improver in it. Oof. Brush needs some water on it. With flow improver on it, and it's a little bit thinner just so that it runs into the recesses. And what I'm doing here, which is called recess shading or pin shading, is essentially controlling which recesses the paint goes or the wash goes into. So I don't want to spread the wash all over the work that I did on Monday. What I want it to do is I want it to go into only the deepest recesses and really accentuate those. I didn't used to pin wash or recess shade my miniatures, but I started painting up a Warhammer 40K army, and with those miniatures, they've got a lot of like really thin lines and recesses and things like that, and so recess shading has been an absolute lifesaver to bring out a lot of the detail in that. So I figured I'd give it a try here just to see what it would look like. And I think so far it's turning out nice. Except when I do this pin shading, you can see how shaky my hands are sometimes. Well, I'm glad. I'm genuinely glad that number one, you're enjoying watching, but number two, that you're excited, because honestly, once she printed out, I was so excited about getting her on camera and painted. It's interesting. So I was telling Matt this the other night. For those of you who don't know, I mean Matt, 2-Bit Lane. Since I finished the miniatures he had me do first, which were a couple of NPCs, I've learned so much more about miniature painting, developed new techniques and styles and things like that, that I almost want to repaint his, because I don't feel like what I gave him is the same quality that I'm doing now. I don't think my work is all that great of quality, but definitely better now than it was then. So I feel bad because it's honestly it's taken a lot longer for me to finish Bex's and Liam's than I really wanted to. I wanted to hopefully get all the miniatures out to y'all like a couple months, but it's been almost, I don't know, like 8 months or something since I started this whole process. But that has also given me some time to develop new skills. So for this recess watch, I'm just going into all these different raised edges and just putting a line of that wash in that edge. And so if you can see, for instance, on this part of her leg here, you can now kind of see that there's that hard transition between, or shadow between, the straps and her pants, versus here you don't really have that. It just kind of blends together a little bit. And so adding this recess wash just accentuates all these really cool details that this miniature has, which is something I talked about on Monday. Like, as far as some of the different miniatures from Hero Forge that I've seen, this is honestly one of the coolest. So first of all, hats off to you, Bex, for posing and designing a really awesome character, but also letting me paint her. Not gonna lie, when I actually offered to do this, like, it was just in Discord, and it was before I'd even met any of y'all, like, over voice chat. And so I was like, oh, hopefully I don't think I'm some weirdo who just wants all their miniatures. I mean, I am some weirdo, just not that kind of weirdo. I'm sure. One interesting thing about washes too is, like, wash is something that, and I think I mentioned this when I was painting the two smaller miniatures. Wash is also known as liquid talent because washes, especially when used a little bit more liberally than what I use them on, does a really, really good job of accentuating certain parts of miniatures, right? So all the recesses, all the details. And so if you're just really starting out and you want a miniature to look really, really good, and you think, hey, I'm painting this thing, it looks flat, looks boring, and it's not really working out, go ahead and apply a wash to it. Make sure you, like, paint the miniature about 2 to 3 shades lighter than, or brighter than, you think it will be, because the shade will darken it a little bit. But if you add if you add a wash to the miniature, it'll bring out those details and make it pop and make it look a lot better than you really intended, right? Or not intended, I guess that's a bad use. It looks like you're better than you are in some situations. Like larger miniatures like this one, I would never just slather on you know, like a coat of wash, because then it would just make it look blotchy and bleh. But on smaller ones, you can get away with that. And it makes it look pretty good most of the time. Again, you don't want to apply like a black wash to like a miniature that has like a bunch of neon colors, but at the same time, you don't want to do like a blue wash over a red, or or like a brown wash over, you know, a really bright color or something like that. Just make sure that whatever shade of wash you're using complements what you're trying to do. So for instance, they make washes that are specifically designed for skin tones. They're usually a light brown, because most skin tones are light brown, or at least human skin tones, I should say. So you may not want to use it for an orc, but for your elves, humans, dwarves, looks really good. You want to use that on like the face or arms, or, you know, depending on the, you know, like if you're painting a barbarian, doesn't have a shirt on, over abs, pecs, whatever. Wherever the skin is, you add that skin tone and it makes it look pretty nice. Then over the rest of the miniature, you use something like this, which is more of a black or gray wash. And yeah, looks great. Now, one thing, the reason why I did mention on Monday that one of the things I'm going to do is soften up some of these highlights that I already put on. The reason I'm doing this pin wash first is this pin wash will actually do that for me to an extent. I'm still going to have to go back and do it manually, but this will help. Because I'll tell you what, a wash covers a multitude of sins, my friends. Just looking for places I may have missed up top, and I did. I missed underneath this strap here. There we go. And we'll do the same thing, because if you remember, these boots had these little wrinkles and folds in them. Just going to add a touch to those. Just like that. A little bit on the back here. And again, I'm not using a ton of wash here. I'm just using just a teeny little bit. Just to accentuate those shadowy bits. Okay. Cool. All right, so just while I was doing this, I did notice that the where are you at? Might have helped if I actually got all the paints I wanted out of this. What? Oh, I used Snow Shadow for that. Okay, cool. So for the sword, it's the transition isn't as good as I wanted it. So I'm going to bring back my wet palette. Get over here. And we're going to create another wash with our same color we did with when we did the wet blend yesterday with the sword. And I'm going to try to make that transition a little bit smoother than it is. Get some water here. You notice that I am separating the actual wash like pile away from the main bit of paint. The reason I'm doing that is in case I make some sort of mistake where my wash isn't exactly right, I still want to be able to come back. Like maybe if I added too much water, right? I want to be able to come back and add a little bit more paint, a little bit more pigment to it. So again, when I'm painting on my wash, I'm painting towards the color that the wash is. So for instance, in this case, the glaze. The glaze here at the color here at the tip is the color of the glaze I'm doing, so I'm moving towards the tip. I hope Calico's not here because she would run with that. Just so that at the end of my brush stroke, I'm going to end up with a small pool of glaze. And I want that small pool of glaze to end up on the color I'm actually painting in. And I also want to make sure that if I have any recesses like this, that I'm not pooling there, because a pool means that I would have a blotch of color there that's a little bit different than everything else around it, which is not what I want. I want something that's nice and smooth. Always want to move in the same direction too. So for instance, if I were applying this glaze, I wouldn't want to move like in a back and forth motion. I just want to move in one direction. I'm still learning about glazing, because glazing is not easy to get right. It's really easy to color within the lines, but it's not really easy to get the consistency that you really need for a good glaze. There we go. Cool. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some more of this gray black that we had earlier, and we're going to create a glaze out of that, because there are parts on her trousers here that I think are a little bit too light. And we're going to take more of that blue that we added to it yesterday. Try to get that same color. Man, I feel like I'm losing my voice, but don't know why. Couldn't possibly be that I talk too much. There we go. Nice dark blue. By the way, in case you're wondering, the reason why I'm dabbing off, I'm wicking away a little bit of that glaze, is if you have too much, you can end up with a situation where you're putting so much glaze down that it begins to pool. You really don't want that to start pooling. You want it to look nice and smooth. That's the whole point of a glaze, is to create smooth, clear transitions between dark and light. So it kind of defeats the purpose of a glaze if all you have is just a large pool of paint in one area. I know a lot of these a little bit more subtle things that I'm doing aren't showing up great on camera, but like I always do, I'll post pictures in the Discord once I'm done. So I'm just checking over my work, making sure all's well before I move on. One thing I did notice, I actually noticed this yesterday, not today. That's not the right color. There it is, my earth brown. That the boots, the highlights on the back of the boots were a little bit too contrasty and not very smooth. So I'm just going to pull in, try to recreate that color. Again, create a glaze. And we're just going to paint a little bit of that glaze over those highlights. Now with this, I don't know how well you can notice this, but I'm adding a little bit more water than I would normally because I still want those highlights to be there. I just don't want them to be as stark as they are now. Just like that. Do the same on the front of the toe here. And here. I know you couldn't see that on camera, but again, still trying to get used to how that actually works. Where did I put my gray black? There it is. Yeah, I'm going to start saving up for a nice DSLR because I really want this to come across nice, and the colors with this webcam aren't the greatest. But you're right, it is about the process. It's about kind of sharing what I'm doing, even though you might not be able to see the colors themselves. You know, like how do you use a glaze, how to highlight things like that. But I'm using this here. I don't know if adjusting the light will help at all, but I'm going to use some more of this gray black, and this is going to be the base coat for the rock. Because igneous rock, especially when it's first solidifies, it's kind of a dark gray, almost black. So we're just going to base coat the top of this rock. There we go. That's a better angle for y'all. Base coat the top of this rock with that gray black. Saying gray black feels like an oxymoron because isn't gray already a black? Probably not technically. There's like probably some technical thing that says no, gray is gray and black is black, but I feel like gray is just black with a little bit of white. Couldn't just call it like really dark gray. There's something I didn't see before. So there's actually some support material still on her shoe here. Never worry, because support material for resin is super brittle and easy to remove, especially once it's been cured. So all I have to do is really just press on it. It should snap right off, unless, yeah, I'll have to get that later, because evidently it is when it was printed alongside of the actual like model, and so it's instead of being separate from the actual body of the model, it is kind of along the same side. So what I'm going to do is I'll take a hobby knife and I will just cut it off, or I'll take a pair of hobby snips and cut it off. And then usually what I'll do after that is I'll take a small file and make sure that we don't have any like little nubs or anything like that from where it was at. All right, so just really straightforward base coated that with that dark gray. And now we're going to start building up the lava. So for this, we're going to use a couple different colors. And it's going to look weird because of the technique that I'm going to be using and the paint that I'm going to be using later. But these are the colors we're going to be using. We're going to be using fire red, phoenix red, and fire orange. And what we're going to do is we're going to base coat with the red. And then we're going to randomly apply spots of the orange and the phoenix red. That way, whenever I apply the crackle paint, what it'll do once it starts to break up is you'll see like gradients from like light to dark and things like that. It'll look super cool. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. Evidently, this nozzle is clogged. So we're not going to do it with this. So for those of you who are wondering, I've got my whole paint rack down here. Just sitting back there. Fire red. There we go. And back down we go. Mostly because there's absolutely no room on my little computer desk, my gaming desk, for a paint rack of that size. There is on my hobby desk, just not here. Here we go. We'll use my medium brush here. This, by the way, is a Monument Kolinsky Sable brush. It's a number 3 brush. So it's a good size for most miniature painting because it's small enough to have a nice fine point for when you have to get to those really important details. But it's also large enough so that when you need to paint larger areas, you can. Got some bones here sticking out of the lava, so we want to make sure that we don't cover those in red. There's some areas here that I know I'm not going to be able to show on camera because it's like underneath this little jetty here. Is that a word? I don't know. We're just going to paint all the lava in that red color. Just like that. And since I'm going to be doing kind of like where it's like starting to melt on the underside of the rock, I'm also going to bring this up about a quarter of the way up the underside of this rock. Oh yeah, definitely gonna be hard to see this, but you know what? Like Beck said, it's about the process. Both me learning how to do this on camera and describing what I'm actually doing. There we go. Just like that. So you see we got a little bit underneath there. And again, it looks kind of weird now because it's all red and there's nothing really separating it from where you think the lava would actually be, which is down here. But I think it's going to look really good in the end. While that dries, we'll go ahead and start with our bones. So for that, we're going to use, as the base coat, we're going to use this Xandri Dust by Citadel. It's a nice dark, kind of sandy look. Almost like if you took khaki and added a little bit of dark brown to it. That's exactly what we're dealing with here. And we're just going to start painting all these little skulls and bones this color. will actually start layering lighter and lighter, lighter the closer towards the lava it gets. I know I've explained this before, but I don't know if there's anybody new here because I don't have the actual Twitch page up, but I tend to start dark and then go light because for me, it's always easier to go lighter than it is to go darker. Even though darker paint generally gives you better coverage, right? So you'd think it would be easier to go from darker to lighter. Me personally, I tend to get, I'm better at picking out where light is than where light isn't. So when talking about lighting and things like that, if I am able to highlight up where light is, for me, it's a little bit easier. I'm trying to figure out where the light isn't. There's a straight up rib cage just sitting here. Somehow a rib cage survived a bath in lava. And again, we're kind of going back to the beginning stages of painting with this base because we didn't really touch it at the beginning. So I'm going with my kind of theory of base coating, and that is I'm just putting paint on the miniature. And I'm not really worrying about whether or not it is perfect or in the lines. I can mess up. I can go back and fix that. It's not too hard. So I did get a little too much paint in one of these eye sockets, so I'm just washing my brush off and trying to wick away some of that paint. Look at all these bones. Hopefully Elbereth didn't put them there. Unless they're bad guys. I hope Elbereth put them there. I like this song. It's nice and relaxing. What kind of music do y'all like to relax to the most? Like if you're just sitting down for an evening, wanting to just kind of sit back and listen to some music, what are y'all tending to put on? Parody music? So Liam, are you a Weird Al kind of guy? Yeah, Bex, I know. Never happens much, especially with me, but like if somebody was like, all right, you get an hour to relax, even if you still have to work, just what would you listen to? Look, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. I don't really sit still. Like, again, I know I've told y'all this, that when I'm watching Trials of Imagination, I'm painting because I can't just sit there and watch Trials of Imagination. I have to be doing something. But last night I was actually playing. I was playing a game while I was listening to y'all, which was the first time I've done that, and it did not turn out well. William, I know you play. I know you play chess. So while that's still, I guess, technically gaming, but most people call that, you know, sitting for a long period of time. So if you were listening to music while playing chess, what would you listen to? It's kind of that, like that lo-fi kind of feel, or just like, I guess that's what you would call this, right? Lo-fi. Just gonna look around here, make sure I get all these bones nice and covered, that there's no more gray from the primer left. Except maybe inside the eye sockets, because we'll add a wash to some of these bones just to give it a little bit more depth to it. All right, so I did have to go outside the lines a little bit on these just so I could get a good angle. So I'm going to go back to my red here and go back and correct some of those mistakes. Horror synth, that's interesting. I mean, honestly, from everything I've seen, totally makes sense. So I feel like you're somebody who really enjoys a good horror movie. I don't personally, just I don't not like them. It's just nothing I'm super into, you know. All right, so we're going to go ahead and transition to Gotcha. Okay. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a brush that I don't really care about. So I've got some of these like cheap brushes that I got off of Amazon a while ago. They said they were like Kolinsky Sable, and they were really cheap and they didn't do much. And I'm going to stipple. So what stippling is taking the front end of your brush and basically tapping it, creating a bunch of small dots. I'm just going to do that in random areas. Except it looks like this may not have been very well shaken up, so let me shake it up a little bit more, because I'm getting mostly medium. Are you kidding me? That clogged the nozzle? Are you serious? It literally did. That's amazing. So we'll just take the top off real quick and pour a little bit on there. There we go. That's all I need. Ah, too much. It's going to be way more than I need, but it's okay. Oh, now it decides to unclog. That's amazing. That's nice. Sometimes, y'all. I swear. If I wasn't sane, I would go insane. Although I'm not really sane right now, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah. I feel like, you know, some slashes are good, right? And some slashes are done well, but most of them aren't. So I'm adding a little bit of yellow to this orange because it doesn't give me quite enough difference between the red that I was using to really show up. So I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow to that and go back over the areas that I wanted to. And again, I'm just adding random patches of this yellow, or this, I guess you could say alternate red, just in random places. Doesn't really matter if it's consistent. In fact, the less consistent, the better. Sorry, I know this isn't on camera, but some of this is kind of hard to get to. All right, wash that off. Transition over to our orange. So you can't hear me? Oh, okay. I was like, wait, everything looks right on my end. What did it do this time? Had me worried there for a second, Bex. I was like, not again. But at this point on this stream, it's pretty much to be expected. So we're moving to our lighter color. Again, just adding random bits and strings of this lighter color. Adding a little bit of yellow here, not because I really want to lighten it up, but because this orange tends to be a little bit desaturated. Or I shouldn't say desaturated, more, it's less pigmented. And so it's a little bit more transparent than other colors. And so just adding a little bit of the like base color. For instance, if the orange is more of a reddish orange, adding a little bit of red. If the orange is a little bit more on the yellow side, adding a little bit more yellow will help bring some of that pigment back. And again, we're just going to add it in random places, random shapes and the like. Because again, all we're trying to do is we're trying to get to the point that once that paint that we're going to be using off stream starts to crackle, that we see different shades of red and yellow and orange. So it looks a little bit like there's lava underneath it. Just like that. So you can see it doesn't look really nice right now, but once I add that crackle effect, it'll look awesome. So now that I've done that, there are a few places in these skulls that I'm seeing that still have a little bit of a couple holidays, as my grandfather used to say. So we're just going to correct those, make sure that we're getting nice, even coating coverage. Just like that. Going back to my gray here because I did accidentally get some of that bone color on my stone here. And I missed a little bit of this stone here when I originally base coated it. So we're just going to fill that up there. Just like that. really what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring life into this base, because this base would have looked cool even if it hadn't been painted, right? If it had been black, it would have looked just as nice. The reason I say that is I'm going to take my time with this base. I'm going to make it look really, really nice, because this is something I enjoy doing. But whenever we paint miniatures, we always want to make sure that the focus of our miniature lies somewhere. So you don't want so much detail in a miniature that it draws your eye from different places. So in this case, really what Elbereth, where I want to draw attention, is her wings and her face. That's where I want the attention to be grabbed. So while I'm putting a lot of detail into this base, and it's going to look really cool, ultimately a lot of these colors are muted. A lot of these colors aren't going to be as vibrant as what you see in her face and in her wings. Because that's where we want the eye to be drawn. We want people to see the wings. We want to see her in her majesty with this determined look on her face. We don't want to see necessarily skulls, right? It's a nice touch, and we're definitely going to make sure it's the best that it can be. But that's not where our focus wants to be. Our focus wants to be on our hero and what she's doing, right? So, and that's kind of the approach that I like to take with pretty much anything that I paint, even the small miniatures, right? Because like if you remember back when we were doing their cloaks were nice and bright colors. They looked really cool. But ultimately, it's not necessarily where we want the attention to be drawn. We want the attention to be drawn either where that miniature is looking, right? So we could do that with a look. We can make the miniature look off into the distance with determination or fear or anxiety. And so our eyes are drawn to almost this idea of what is she looking at? What are they looking at? Again, Elbereth is a little bit different, but whenever I'm painting a miniature that's going to be mine or a player is going to use, I love giving them stories. Like, why is she standing on a rock over lava? How did she get into a situation where she's basically putting herself in so much danger? Are those the skulls for enemies? Are those the skulls for friends? And she's looking back towards those who killed her friends? You know, stuff like that. Just giving the miniature story and knowing exactly what they're doing and why. For me, you know, you don't have to do that if you decide to get into this hobby, but I think it's a cool little thing to do where we can kind of shape our miniatures by the stories we tell with them. Because everything tells a story, whether we want to or not. Like, have you ever thought about walking past somebody at Walmart, or walking past somebody, for those of my friends of mine who are in Canada, I don't know what the Walmart equivalent is in Canada, but if you go to a supermarket and you're walking past somebody, it's really easy to look at them, at what they're wearing or what they're doing, maybe the way they're acting, and kind of judge them based upon that, right? But everything they're doing, everything they're saying, everything they're wearing is telling a story. I think if we took the time to get to know that story a little bit better, I think we'd get along with people a little bit more. I don't know, just random thought. I didn't know if Canada had Walmarts, Liam, so now I know. All right, so we're going to move back to our wash. And we're going to apply a wash to these skeleton bones just to make those recesses a little bit darker. We're going to use a bigger brush because we want more of the wash on it. So already, like, if you look at that skull there, like this one here, versus this skull that I just applied the wash to, you can see immediately that the skull I applied the wash to, all of a sudden you have the nose, the eyes, even a little bit of the like dip in the brow come to life, versus this one over here, where this one right here, where yeah, you see the eye sockets, but until I put that wash on, now all of a sudden the details just start to come alive. And that's one of the cool things about wash, and again, why I refer to it as liquid, why a lot of people, not just me, refer to it as liquid talent, because it makes all of those really cool details just come to life. Ironic that dead bones are coming to life. Hashtag the Bible did it first. I don't know. When I went to Mexico, I never saw Walmart, but I was in more of a poor part of Mexico, so maybe it's more in like the richer areas, like, or the touristy areas. Gotcha. Well, I don't know, because you always hear like stories about people coming from overseas, like seeing a Walmart and just being amazed. So I just didn't know if Walmart was international, or maybe it's just North America and like Mexico, or I don't know. It's be an interesting thing to find out, for sure. Gotcha. Yeah, see, that would make sense if you had like a cruise ship stop or like a touristy area have a Walmart, because right, that's, it's profitable for them. But like, for instance, I was in a place called Naco, Sonora, which is Sonora is a province of Mexico, and Naco is a city just south of Arizona. And it was the kind of place where you literally had like cinder block huts with no ceilings, where the richest person in town lived in a single wide trailer that we would think is just the absolute slum of the earth in North America, or at least in America, where like there were literally like families of 5 staying in like a 10 by 10 cinder block hut. So that was the area I was in. Wouldn't be really profitable for a Walmart to be in somewhere like that. But yeah. Yeah, I feel like if you're buying anything on a cruise ship, it's just inherently going to be more expensive, right? It's almost like if you go to a convenience store, like you're going to pay $2 or $3 for a soda when you can go buy a 6-pack at like, Harris Teeter or something like that. And it comes out to like $1 for the same size bottle or something like that. It's just all about the convenience. Yes, but you also have to understand that poor in America is exceptionally wealthy everywhere else. So when we talk about poor areas in like Mexico, we're not talking about poor as in like, stuff like that. You're talking like desperately poor people. So what I'm doing now is I am starting to bring out the highlights in some of these bones. So really what I'm doing here is I am creating these highlights where I think the light would be emanating from beneath it. So it's being underlit. And unlike before, so before a lot of the highlights and stuff that I do on like her on like her clothing, her armor, and things like that, I want it to be nice and smooth. But the closer you get to the light source and the more reflective a material is, the more contrast you get. And the more stark that switch between light and dark and shadow gets. So really what I'm going to be doing here is it's basically blocking out my highlights, but I'm not really going to fade it like I did with all my other ones. But yeah, the brighter the light source, the more contrast you're going to get on the for the reflections. It's like if you, and then the more polished something is too. So for instance, if you go and look at, say, a metal spoon, right? Or like, let's take the ferrule of this brush here. Come on, there we go. You see how like you have that bright spot right there, how it doesn't fade from like that bright white to almost black on this side. It just goes from light to black immediately. But if I did something like, I don't know, I don't really have anything that's dull around me. Let's go with this little dice container here. You can see that as we go from that really bright spot there to the dark spot over here, it's that nice smooth gradient. So the more polished something is, the higher contrast you get, and the more stark the contrast between light and dark is. And so what I'm trying to communicate with the way I paint these bones is I want to communicate that there's a very bright light source below it, and that these bones have been polished by their time in this volcanic area. And let's see, where's my next color? Polished bone is what I am looking for. Where are you at? I swear, I would lose my face if it wasn't firmly attached to my skull. And it doesn't help that, there you are, polished bone. That's the color we want. This is an almost white, more of like an off-white. So I'm going to mix in a little bit of that last color into it just to darken it a little bit, but really we're going to want pretty close to that. There we go, just like that. And again, just like before, we're just going to start working our way about halfway down, right on the edge of where those skulls meet the lava, or on the underside of some of these like femurs. I'll tell you what, my time in Mexico, being around poverty like that, I was there for about a week. I went, there's a small orphanage that's run by a ministry here in America for orphans who are left behind at the border by people trying to cross. What will end up happening is people trying to cross are so desperate to make a better lives for themselves and their families that they would be willing to leave their children behind in hopes that they would come to America, earn enough money to where they could come back, get their family, get their children. And so what happens, especially on those border towns like Naco is a border town with Arizona, is they'll get to the border and the people leading them will say that the coyote on the other side wants more money if you want to take your children with you. So they take advantage of these desperate people and their families to get more money. And if they can't pay, then they have to leave their children behind. And so what the thought process is, well, we'll go to America, we'll make money, come back and get our children. And then those people end up getting deported to another part of the country, can't afford to come back and get their children, or they die in Death Valley. And those kids are unfortunately unadoptable because per Mexican law, a child or a parent must give consent in order for a child to be adoptable. So these children couldn't be adopted, so they would stay in that orphanage till they're 18. And so we went with a group from a parachurch organization here in the United States to go, and they go once a year along with some other groups throughout the year to make sure that those kids have everything that they would need. We did stuff like we painted their basketball court in their play sets so that they could take pride in what they had. The place was riddled with things like lice, and so we went and we de-liced everything. We went into a local store, like a local little mart, and we bought things like beans, flour, stuff like that to... oh, dude, thanks for the raid, man. In the middle of a super depressing story, but okay. Anyway, so we went and we bought a bunch of like food and supplies from a local shop, and we separated them out into these bags, and we went out into the community and passed out food at the end of the week. And then we did like a vacation Bible school for the kids as well. So super sad situation. But then the point of this was when I came back to the United States, it was such a shock, right? So going there, it was like, okay, I've been in places like this, and you kind of get to know more about their situation the longer you're there. And then going from that back to the United States, and I live in one of the most affluent areas in the nation, as far as like the part of North Carolina I'm in. And so coming back to that's for me, that was the most shocking thing, is coming from living a week in abject poverty and getting to know more, like how bad it gets more and more and more, to then coming back. That was really, really hard. And so one of the things that God taught me through that situation is like, Jesus said that the poor are always going to be with us. So then the question is, how can we then help the poor? And, how do I reconcile God's gifts for me that he's given me with the situation that some other people are in? And the answer that I came with, and the answer for me is, well, I take the gifts that God has given me and I share them with those who are in need. And hopefully in doing that, I share the love of Christ with them and that they come to know him. So that was kind of my what I learned from that whole experience. But yeah. So I'm right now going to apply a second coat of wash to all of this. Just so I can bring back a few more of those details that I lost in the highlighting process. But I appreciate the raid, Lava. I think this is the first raid I've ever had. All right, cool. So looking at all of the stuff I did. So for instance, I did do this transition a little bit. I do like that transition a little bit more than where it was at. I think it needs a little bit more work. So I'm going to bring out some of that, bring back my palette here. I'll bring some of the, do I have just that plain gray? Yeah, I do right here. But it's almost dry, so we'll grab a little bit more of that. And we're going to create a glaze from that. And we'll try to kind of bring out that make that transition a little bit smoother there. So one thing I can do too is I can actually do what's called feathering. Feathering is when you take the wet paint and you move it back and forth like I am now. And it feathers out that edge a little bit just to make that transition just that much smoother. Well, I have alert set up. That's the weird thing. And like whenever somebody follows me or something like that. So I don't know why it didn't alert me to the raid. I need to get that set up. I'll do that at some point. I don't know. Probably, yeah. The one thing I don't have is raid alert. So I'm just bringing back a little bit of this the darkness in this mace, because now that I go back and look at it, it's all a little bit pale. So I'm just adding a little bit of this. I'm glazing over just the top of this mace towards the ferrule with some gray black. Just like that. Thank you, Duck. I appreciate the alert there. All right, now I'm just going to start looking around, checking her out, seeing where I can maybe improve on things. Grab a little bit of this brown that I used earlier. And yesterday on her, Monday, on her chest, I did a little bit of a gradient here, and that is a little bit too stark for my taste, so I'm just going to feather that out a little bit more. What? I have no idea what Basement Jacks is, but all right, I got a couple holes here where we still have, like on the side of things, where I still have a little bit of white showing through, so just gonna go ahead and patch that up. Again, making sure that there's no primer still showing on this thing. All right, now I think it's about time that we do metallics. So metallics are, I prefer to do metallics last because metallics are pain. So metallic paint is essentially going to be a color with mica powder in it. And that mica powder is basically what catches the light and makes it look metallic, right? So in this case, we're going to be applying metallic paint to things like her belt buckle, some of the buckles and straps and D-rings and things like that that are holding her straps on. That is... I don't know why that brush was really stiff. That was weird. Not metallic dragons, just metallic paints. Metallic dragons are just fun. Especially you get to be a metallic dragonborn. Those are fun too. So we're just going in, we're doing some of her buckles. Trying to be careful. Really, here is where I don't want to make a mistake, because I really do not want metallic paint on any other part of her. I don't know what is going on with this brush, but it is not working out for me. Switch to a different one. There we go, that's a little bit better. I mean, gem dragonborns are certainly cool, but you know, you gotta go with the classics sometimes, you know? Metallic dragons are just cool. So we got some buckles over here. And some on her arm straps. I'm not gonna lie, I have no idea what those arm straps are supposed to be holding on to. But they're there, and so we paint them. There we go. Exactly. You've got these little rivets here that are really, really small. So we're just gonna take our brush here and just kind of tap on them. That should put enough metallic paint on those to kind of have them pop. So you really don't need much. Really all we're trying to do is get the idea that they're rivets. And that can be done just with a little tap. Does not take much. I'm going to pull up the reference photo real quick because I want to make sure I know what this mace is supposed to look like. All right, cool. So it's the ferrule. It's kind of golden, or the like the handle part of it. Okay. Cool. And then the little cap at the end is silver. So we'll go ahead and add that cap in. And you guys notice that sometimes I'll wash off my brush even if I'm not changing colors. The reason I'm doing that is the way that I like to keep my brushes, you've got a couple different parts of the brush, right? So you've got the tip, the belly, and then the ferrule. So the closer to the ferrule you get, so right in here, right at the base there, you really don't want paint to get up in there. Because if you let paint get up in there, then you're not going to be able to wash it out because the bristles are really tight. And what will end up happening, especially if paint dries up in there, is it will start to spread the tip of the brush out. So you really want to keep your paint in the tip and right in the center of the brush called the belly. That's where all of your paint's being held. So I wash off my brush every so often just to make sure that as I'm painting, it's not working its way back towards the ferrule. Just a little bit of brush care 101 for you. That's especially true with metallic paint, because metallic paint does not like to come out of brushes, which is why I use my synthetic brushes for metallic paint and I use my natural hair bristles for everything else. Fair. There are rings right here at the like where the mace meets the handle or the shaft, right here on the reference photo you sent me. They look gold. If you want a different color, I can always paint it a different color, but they look kind of gold in the reference photo. They could also, I guess, be bronze, but they kind of look gold. Thanks, Duck. I appreciate it. Oop, I forgot the cap here. On top of the mace is also silver. Okay, yeah, we can definitely do that. I got some really cool bronze colors. Again. Now, especially around this mace head, since we put so much time and effort into that, I'm really trying to avoid getting any metallic paint on it. Yeah. So there are a few things that I can do to get that effect. So first of all, I can use this color, which is called True Copper by Army Painter. You can tell there that compare that to like this gold that I was going to use. It's much darker and more muted. I could do that. I can also, one of the things that I've done in the past is I'll mix a wash into the metallic paint and that will darken it. But what I can always add more, but I think this is nice and muted and dark. I think that will work well for you. So you can look as I spread it out, how much darker it is than most everything else on the palette. This part is fun because you got her hand right there. So either way you slice it, either I'm getting metallic on her hand. Oh yeah, I'm not gonna be able to show this on camera, but I'll just go ahead and grab it. But there we go. Cool. Now, while I want to show most of the process that I'm doing on camera, because obviously, you know, people want to see it, I guess. Some of this will have to be done off camera. For instance, I spent about an hour working on her eyes and her face a little bit more off camera, mostly because with the amount of light that I have in this room right now, I've got to do some upgrading. And just kind of with the time allotment that I have, not really able to show every little detail of what I'm doing, but I'll try to show most everything. All right, so I'm just going to look back through real quick, see if there's any touch-ups I need to do, because I am very close to being done. At least with this stage of the paint job. So I'm just painting inside the handle here, inside her hand, because where she was gripping on this had a little bit of over painting on it. So I think I'm going to try something real quick on this mace, because again, I'm trying to get it to look right. So I'm going to thin down my glaze even more than I was. I'm just going to add a little, bring up that darkness a little bit further closer to the top here. Because again, what I'm trying to really convey is that it's glowing, and right now it looks more like it is colored that way versus actually glowing. Maybe it might help if I, again, put this in frame. I'll learn eventually, I promise. Probably not. And again, when applying a glaze, you move the direction of the color you're glazing with, and in all in one direction. You don't want to move back and forth. That looks better. That looks much better. Yeah, I kind of like that. All right, cool. Now I'm going to bring back the wash. And what I like to do, especially with metallic paints, is I like to apply washes directly on any metallics. It makes it kind of look a little bit grittier, but a little bit more like worn in. Doesn't look shiny and new, right? So if Elbereth here has spent centuries adventuring, actually at this point it would just be Barovia, right? So several years. However long is in Beck's backstory. Adventuring, her gear wouldn't look new. So we're just going to apply a wash to all of these metallic areas, just so that what we're not seeing is just this bright, shiny, brand new looking stuff. It looks a little bit darker, it looks a little bit worn in, looks a little bit used. Cool. I did notice a little bit of a miss on my part. I forgot to do just underneath the mace here. So if you notice, and I'm not sure how well this is showing up on camera, when I try to go into detail, I'm locking my arms in place and I'm really pushing my elbows into my side. That gives me a nice stable platform when I'm moving my brush back and forth, so that my arms and my hands aren't shaking. I have a nice solid resting platform. I have multiple points of contact with my handle and the miniature. Just so that we're making sure we're not making too many mistakes. Okay, yeah, so still, with 5 years of experience, you know, her armor would not look new. Not even close, right? It would look old, beat up, worn. To be honest, she might look old, beat up, and worn after that amount of time too, right? Depending on what kind of adventure she got herself into. Because one of the things that we often don't think about when we're thinking about Dungeons and Dragons and heroes and things like that, life as a hero isn't easy, right? You know, we think it'd be really cool to be like, oh, an age of knights and dragons and things like that, but you gotta think, one of the things that drives story is loss. And so if we think about some of the more popular fiction works, right? A lot of it revolves around loss and around people dying, right? So for those who are fans of the series Stormlight Archives will recognize this, right? The main protagonist, Kaladin, loses his friends left and right, and he's very depressed and frustrated about this. And or like we think about Lord of the Rings, right? Lord of the Rings has tons of loss. So sometimes when we don't really think about how much pain and suffering some of our heroes go through. Like, you know, if we're looking at Frodo, for instance, as a ring bearer, you know, think about what he had to endure, the temptation of the ring, having to feel the ring wraith's blade. You know, he did not have it easy. So what I'm doing here now is I am edge lining the blade here. And what that's going to give me is a nice sharp line on the edge, making it look, well, sharp. Yeah, Sam is really solid, you know, besides the fact that he was able to endure the temptation of the ring. No matter what happened, Sam stayed by Frodo's side so that the one person he had never abandoned him. Right? Now, obviously, Frodo abandoned, at least in the movies, Frodo abandoned Sam. But that's one thing that I love about fantasy storytelling, is that in the darkest times, we always can count on someone, right? So what I'm also doing now is I'm adding a little bit of white into my mix here, so that once this blade gets closer to the tip, that edge is looking brighter and brighter and brighter. And this is also where part of my nervousness comes in, because there's a lot of little tiny edges here. I don't want to highlight them all, but I do want to highlight some of them. So I'm just using the very tip of my brush to just bring out some of these edges here. And this little center piece of this. It's going to go all the way down. And again, if we think about light for a moment, light won't necessarily catch every edge on this blade, but it will catch a lot of them. So by edge highlighting, it makes it look like that light is hitting that blade and really making it look nice. Again, bringing out that detail. Again, with miniature painting, we're not necessarily looking for, well, depends on the style, I guess. We're not really looking for, you know, hyper realism. We're just looking for what looks nice and what looks good, right? This is a fantasy character. The light doesn't have to look perfect or real to real world. But, you know, you hear me talking about things like lighting. I want there to be enough realism in the lighting to ground the miniature in reality, right? I don't want there to be like some weird glow where like on one side of the miniature it's glowing, you know, with one intensity and then the other it's with another. I want it to be consistent in my lighting source. That in and of itself will ground it enough in reality to where I can do some interesting things with my lighting effects to make it look interesting. It's very similar to how people write fantasy, actually, because fantasy as a genre, you know, you have all these fantastical creatures and like magic and things like that. That doesn't exist in reality. So what do? You ground some aspects of your world in reality. That way it's relatable, while other aspects of your world are fantasy. So that allows the reader, or in this case the viewer, to be able to recognize, hey, I know that, I recognize that. While at the same time being like, oh man, that is so different from what I normally see that it's weird, right? So like, that's why, you know, you're like, if you're writing a story or writing a world, you want there to be things like gravity. Because if you don't have things like gravity, without being in outer space, that is, you know, how are we going to relate? Or if you do add a world without gravity, be consistent with how it works. That way, your reader, or in this case, viewer, if we're looking at miniatures, can understand what's going on. All right, so I'm just adding a little bit of light, just the tips of those little ferrules. They're not really ferrules, but you get what I'm saying. I'm going to try to blend those a little bit, but not much, because they're really small, so that blending process is be rather difficult. At least for me, because I'm still pretty new at this. Yep, exactly. Exactly. It needs to be grounded, sometimes quite literally. All right. I'm going to do this. So just looking at this, I don't like the way that it really transitions, because really what we have here is like a transition from light to dark, and then just like what looks like random speckles up here. So I'm going to once again create a little bit of a I've been saying it all night, now I'm blanking. A glaze. Just going to add a little bit of color to this whole side here. As it comes to this hilt. Just to kind of tie it together so that we're not looking at what looks like random speckles, that it actually looks like some sort of a glow. And again, this goes back to what I was just talking about, trying to pull everything together, keep it consistent. Inconsistency is why things look bad. Sometimes. Sometimes you just chose the wrong color. I'm going to wick away some of this from the recesses just so that it's not lining it in a weird way. Good. some little black pieces here where I definitely want those to be red. So I'm just doing my probably like a first to last inspection, or second to last. First to last doesn't make sense. What am I talking about? Okay. Okay, so now what I want to do, which I forgot the brush in the other room. So I will be right back. Make sure Elbereth doesn't move. All right. We got the brush, y'all. Exactly. All right, so I just went to go get this bad boy. So this is just a flat brush that I use as a dry brush. And if y'all remember from when we did Elbereth's wings, dry brushing is basically putting paint on a brush, drying most of that paint off. What we're going to do here, we're just going to take a little bit of that and we're going to brush the bottom of these skulls to make it look like it has an orange underglow. You see, I knew she would do something like that. She's just a wild child. Once again, I am... Ooh, oh, no, 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 no. Got a little bit of paint on her wing there, but that's okay. I can fix that later. Again, like we talked about last week, mistakes will happen. Don't let it stop you. Just keep moving on and come back and fix it when you can. Again, so basically what I'm doing here is I'm brushing upwards, and what that's going to do is it's going to leave a little bit of paint on just the raised bits that are facing down. So if you can tell, I'm not sure how well you can tell, but you can see like right on that skull how the top of the eye socket and the bottom of the jaw are orange, while the bottom of that is a little bit orange but not as much. Then nothing else on it is. That's what I want it to look like. I want it to look like there is a slight underglow of orange. Now we'll go ahead and give this brush a nice rinse since we really worked in some of that paint into the bristles. Go. All right, so what we'll want to do now is fix that little bit on the wing there. It's not going to be a problemo. We're just going to grab a little bit of white, and we're just going to add a little bit of white on top of it. It'll go right away. even though this bit here was supposed to be pretty much completely clear. Because that one little mistake, we're just going to have to add a little bit of white there, which is okay. It'll still look dope. It's as if it never happened. All right, Bex. Well, I hope you have fun in your game. And yeah, let me know if you want me to change anything. I'll post pictures from tonight on the Discord as always. But I hope you have fun. But I do think I would hazard to say I might lean towards this being pretty much done. So really what I'm going to do now is, like I talked about, I'm going to get some of that crackle paint and I'm going to put it on anything that I used down here on the lava, underneath this rock here. Ooh, you know what? That's something else I could do. I think that would look really cool. Speaking of under the lava, what if I did that same effect that I just did with this orange paint on the skulls, do that underneath the rock. So if it's supposed to be lava, it's not going to be just black. It would have a little bit of a tint to it. So let's do that. Make it look a little bit less flat. Give it more visual interest. So it's just not black. There, just like that. Again, it's subtle, and I'm not sure how well it comes across on camera, but it's just enough to keep it from being just solid black, and it make it look a little bit more interesting. Give it a little bit more pizzazz. I'm never saying that again. All right, now what I'm going to do here is, I don't know why I still have my dry brush out. So I'm not going exactly like the reference photo in a lot of things that I'm doing here. Mostly because the reference photo, again, is really well done, really well posed. But there are certain things that a painter can do that they can't. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to start edge highlighting these stones. Make it look like it's catching the light a little bit. There we go. There we go. That's looking nice. And again, the idea here isn't necessarily that this is going to look super realistic in the way that rock actually works. It's just going to give it a little bit more interesting flavor. Something to visually catch the eye. I want it to be a little bit more subtle than the kind of edge highlighting I would do on, say, her wings, because, again, I want the focal point of this miniature to be her wings and her face, not necessarily these rocks. So I don't want to make it too interesting, but I do want to add a little bit of flair to it. Now there are like areas here where the rocks have chipped away. I'll add a little bit of light to that, light color. So what I just did there with my thumb, I painted over a little bit of a recessed line. I wanted that recess to be gray inside, but is a little bit smaller than what my brush could get into. So what I did is I just painted over it, and then I just used my thumb to scrape away the paint that's on the surface. And so that got it, that gray into that recess there. What in the world happened there? I don't know. That's okay. I'll fix it. I fix it. And just going to cover some of this up. There we go. Awesome. Well, I do think that we are just about done here. Y'all, I'm really liking the way that this turned out. Like I said, I'll post some pictures in the Discord just so you can see where it's at now. As always, with pretty much all my miniatures, I always tend to come back to it. I'll let it sit for a couple days, and then I'll come back and take a look at it with some fresh eyes. You know, with maybe some better light than what I have in this room. Again, I need to upgrade my lighting setup in here. I basically have like one tiny little ring light, like right there, right there, whatever, there. I forget this thing is mirrored. Anyway, like one little ring light off the side, and then like my face light over here. I need to get some better lighting, but that will probably help the process. But I think I'm done. I think she looks amazing. And I cannot wait for Bex to get this in the mail. Hope she loves it. And yeah, so a little bit shorter than my other two were, but I think we are going to end there because, well, the miniature's done. So, like I said, I will go ahead and do the crackle paint off stream because there are some certain things I have to do to it to make the effect work well. Like for instance, you know, take a blow dryer to it, which I don't want to do on stream, just to get it to crack a little bit better. One of the other things that I'll do is right around this edge here, I'll re-black it. So basically it was black when I primed it, and now it's got, you know, paint from the miniature on it. And what I'll end up doing is going around the rim, just painting it solid black, just to make it look a little bit more finished and complete. But for now, I think she is just about there. I'm really happy with the way she turned out. All right, well, y'all, I will be back streaming on Monday, same time, 8 o'clock, and I will be painting Liam's miniature. So Liam is playing Mark on the Trials of Imagination. That it will actually be the last miniature from the Trials of Imagination for me to paint before I've done the entire cast. I actually have Zyle and Nadar sitting behind me on that thing. I need to ship them out. I should probably do that pretty soon. But I'm really excited about getting these to y'all. I hope you love them as much as I've loved painting them. So yeah, I'll post pictures now, and then once it's done, just so you can see the before and after with the crackle paint. I thank you so much for joining me on this awesome miniature of the past week. Let me know, and yeah, I hope to see you on Monday. Have a good one.